All right, so we're gonna start this one out with something a little different, something a little new, and exciting, believe it or not. God damn you. You dirt. Get off. Ah! That's the worst I thought I would be.
Did I get you?
Yeah, you did. I mean, I wiped off most of it.
Well, I mean, you got me, so I was specific.
Yeah, I got you with cleanness. Jesus. Christ. Okay. All right, so, how do I want to do this thing? Logical fallacy, we were talking about this earlier. So, go over a couple examples.
Anecdotal evidence, literally everything that comes out of my mouth.
Fair enough. And we hate that for you. We want you to know that. All right, so I'll just throw out like maybe a few there. If something like, sticks to people like, ooh, that sounds like a cool one, then we can do that sort of thing. Democratic, that sort of thing. Ad hominem. An argument from popularity. False dilemma. Okay, so Angel, we have decided upon as a group, democratically and all that jazz, for talking about the logical fallacy argument from naturalism. So if you can put into like a nutshell, what is exactly that logical fallacy?
Ooh, I'm going to have to look this up very fast.
Okay.
So I can give a strong definition.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I guess online it's defined that the informal logical fallacy that argues that something is natural, that it must be good. And I guess vice versa, if it is not natural, then it is bad. And the, I guess, appeal to it being natural. And then that having like a connotation of goodness or badness. So then I brought up the case of like, you said plastics. Plastics are not natural, then they have the connotation of being bad. So fallacy.
So it's the equivocation, or not equivocation. It's the oh my god. For lack of a better word, it's funny. I was just looking at this too. I don't think it's actually this, but it's the equivocation between between what is natural and what is good. Like so, natural equals good. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. The next part of this is, let's see here. Okay, so part of the situation, what I'm wanting to engage with, if people are okay with this, is that I want to have a volunteer who's gonna like act out. It doesn't have to be like plastic or something like that. They can think of their own, but someone who would like act out fronting this logical fallacy. It's like someone who's like actually convinced of it. Casey, you want to volunteer for that?
Yeah, I think about GMOs. GMOs,
GMOs, yeah. Genetically modified organisms, yeah. Good way to go about that. Okay, and then I was wanting like two different options here. We can do this as like a group, take on the logical fallacy, or we can do we can have like as an individual sort of thing, and then we like observe the interaction from like a third party sort of standpoint. I'm kind of leaning more towards that one. I think like for like a few good reasons, we can focus on like just one person individually, like mix it up and stuff like that. But, like one person like has to, because it's often like the case what happens, right? We don't so often like have like a group behind us to like support us in arguments. Like we kind of need to like actually front ourselves. But then afterwards, being detached yourself, so we're not like emotionally involved, like being in the conversation, which happens on like a larger level. I think like in general terms, like how we would understand like when you're arguing for something, you're like going to be usually emotionally involved, and like particularly if you actually like want to argue against someone using a logical fallacy, right? So being that third party sort of person, right? And then we give feedback and stuff like that. So how do people feel about that? Do we want the group thing, or do we want like someone to volunteer and then we as a group come together and talk about what happened? And there's more to the story about like the interactions I did as a preface. So if some people are thinking about like, oh, like I want to volunteer, there's a discussion to have really quick, and we kind of did this too, you guys. Don't remember if you were there, Autumn, though I'm pretty sure you were there, where we were talking about like when people use logical fallacies, that you're talking to a person, they're a person, and it's not, the focus of mind I think that we often have is they're using something that is logically incorrect, I'm going to attack this. So it's funny, there's something in psychology called the backfire effect, which is basically like, someone has this like false position, right, and you give them like reason and evidence to show them like why they're wrong. What will happen in the backfire is that they steep it even further into like their commitment to their position, right? The problem, I think, really significantly when we talk about that sort of thing, is there something being very significant, right? Being left out, which is the emotional reality that you're not talking to a logical system that's purely, logical, right? Like mathematical. It's emotional. They are emotional. They are irrational at times, right? So the point about that is that when you have these sorts of conversations talking to a person who's utilizing a logical fallacy, you don't want to just front as, I'm going to destroy this illogical position that they have. They think of it as being logical. But instead, as well, ingraining in your fronting, in your reaction to that individual with a focus on the emotional reality. So in other words, as like at least something that we can connect to is, and this actually, part of this comes from, or just let me make a connection really. Kierkegaard, he had something that he called circumventive communication. Also like indirect communication. I like circumventive though. I think it's more accurate. So the reason why it's called circumventive communication, what it is that if you're trying to get someone to believe something, you want to talk to them in such a way where you can get past the roadblocks, right? That they have these defense mechanisms and stuff like that. You want to get around those things, make a connection a more base level to a more base principle that they have, and then build from that connection, right, out to the position that you have so that they can agree with you. You know what I mean? So it's like this, there's roadblocks here, you're thrown around, and then you build up, and it's aha, look at that, bitch, there's a bridge, right? Right, we make bridges, we burn them too, right? So, that sort of thing. Anyway, though. But yeah, so that sort of thing, that would be sort of the preface, the context for this sort of discussion. I recognized last time, I had at half the time I had my face out of it. So, anyway, we're taking a video. But yeah, so how are people feeling about that? Do we want to do an individual thing, or do we want to do a group thing? How are people feeling about that one?
I can go with both.
Okay, so not an answer.
I mean, if I have a first time trial, it might be
I would rather have us watch and have two people kind of act it out.
Okay, all right. But I do want to hear from you, Angel. You were saying as a first time sort of trial, because we are trying this is new.
Yeah.
We want to see how things go. So you think that it would be more pragmatic to work as a group together first, and then we want to maybe we're now going to do individual stuff, right? And I think that's a good idea. It's just a one-off, so we can see as a group this sort of interaction. We can communicate to each other, the collaboration of the lines, and try to work towards this. Because the ultimate point of this sort of thing is not to just be aware of logical fallacies, but as well how to tackle them, right? Identify and respond pragmatically and effectively, auspiciously, is much different words. Anyway, so point being though is that we want to be successful in that sort of endeavor when we do take on and recognize and interact with logical fallacies as they do crop up in our lives. So yeah, I feel inclined to agree with that sort of thing. How are people feeling about that? We do a one-off sort of thing where we're collaborating, maybe the next time too. How people feel. Okay, all right, cool. All right. So Casey, you're saying that you want to volunteer for fronting with the logical fallacy argument from naturalism. Okay, and then what was exactly your what exactly was your example that you wanted? And GMOs. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Specifically recent GMOs that are intentionally
in the lab, right?
Yeah, in the lab. Yeah, basically, because every fruit we eat is a GMO.
Okay.
Because we've, that's outside the scope of what I'm specifically talking about.
Okay. All right. Okay. So you're talking to a group, right? So go ahead and give an opener, right? Go ahead and give an opener for here's my position. Here's what's try to be specific too. You don't want to just have this general sort of thing. We want to be able to grapple onto what you're saying. You're talking about something, right? So go ahead and put it in your own words. You're talking about lab stuff.
Yeah, I don't trust these new lab-grown GMOs. I try to get stuff that's GMO-free because I don't know what's in the stuff that's genetically modified.
Ooh, argument from ignorance too. I like that. I didn't say that to you, by the way. All right.
I'm gonna also probably go humans have never eaten GMOs. We don't know what GMOs are going to do to us. Non-GMO foods are more natural. They're better for us. This is why we should eat them. That would be proper natural.
They're better parts of something I hear a lot, as well.
Okay. Anyone want to respond to him? Say something. How would you respond?
Well, I mean, we as a species have been modifying vegetables and fruits since time immemorial, because we've always planted corn that was more over time that was more, I don't know if I can put this in words very easily, but we've always planted vegetables, we've always favored vegetable seeds that grew vegetables that were more like fertile, or like produced more fruit, or, you know, stuff like that. So in a way that we've always been using GMOs, the modern GMOs are just, you know, kind of a modern version of that.
More of a targeted version of
Yeah.
selective breeding.
Someone might respond to that by saying, when we modify organisms in the real, or previously, we weren't changing them ourselves, the plants were changing themselves and we were picking the best ones. When we change them ourselves, who knows how much, if we know enough about them, if we can trust a few people in the lab to pick the things that are good without changing something that may make it poisonous or harmful or something like that. We don't have the way of testing how, and the speed at which we're doing it is scary.
But we have the Food and Drug Administration for testing. And those few people in the lab are highly trained scientists.
And there's like nothing that would say that like changing the DNA composition of an organism is like going to, I guess maybe if the changes in DNA change the like chemical composition of the product you're eating, and then the like, chemical composition, maybe it's producing something in a plant that is now toxic to you, but just DNA itself is not.
So time out there. Okay, I want you guys to take notice of something. This is like totally part of the human experience. Like, don't feel bad about it or anything like that. I'm gonna go ahead and give a response, and I want you guys to think about. We're gonna have a discussion right immediately after I have this response to him. I want you guys to think about the differences between what I say and what you guys say. Okay, I get that. It's about power. You don't know these individuals. Like, okay, they have like their certifications and their degrees and their like learning stuff like that, but that doesn't necessitate that they really know what's going on, that they know everything. Scientists don't know everything. We know that ourselves. So you're not very well wrong. I think about that though, and it's like, I mean, I get that, and then this is not gonna be fucking perfect, right? I get that though. Like, your feelings are valid, absolutely. I wonder though, like, do you still put that sort of distrust onto, you know, things like penicillin, right? Antibiotics, right? Because that's a lab created thing, right? There's scientists acting as gods in that sort of context. So I'm just like purely curious, right? Do you feel like that sort of perspective about power applies to antibiotics? Do you not take them? I'm just actually just plain curious.
That's a better response.
That's very good, that's very good.
Right? So before you say anything, so what do you guys want to say about what just happened there? About that dichotomy?
You used the circumventional reasoning. Not universal reasoning, but circumventional approach.
Okay,
Which
elaborate.
is more likely to be persuasive because you're appealing directly to his emotions.
Because you're changing the context. You're changing the, I mean, you're making assumptions about this person, and you're asking them if those assumptions are correct, because very well they could be very, very health conscious and not take medication, which is an oxymoron, but whatever. And health conscious means eats food that they grow themselves, kind of stuff, and doesn't go to the doctor. And this person probably, if you're talking to them, especially like at college, they probably do take some kind of medication, antibiotics specifically. An answer they might be giving is antibiotics aren't living things. And this is a different type of genetic modification. And the type of changing the genetic code is what causes cancer in your body.
So I want to, before you go on to a reply, good reply by the way, but does anyone else want to say something? Because there's stuff that we can say about what was like there, the differences. Okay, so I'll go with this. You guys, as right as you are in your approach, right, in a logical sense, right? Again, we're talking to another person here who is committed on an emotional level. We know this too, plainly by the fact that our worldview about what's real, okay, very significant, very, very significant for our stability as individuals in the world, right? You start disrupting that stuff, and you just blow shit up, and it's like, this is mine. Why are you doing this to me? It's like a personal attack, right? that's sort of at least a problem with like this like, let me immediately give this like counter argument to like why you're wrong. I've committed this so many fucking times in my life. So like, don't feel like this is like, you guys are bad, you know? But no, I mean like, so there's good sense there, right? Again, so the connection then, so notice how like, kind of like the words that like I use, right? About, I get that there's like, you know, power at stake here, they don't know everything. There's a validation of their worldview, because that person right there, right? They're not holistically wrong. They're not actually wholly wrong. There's the conclusion that we disagree with, but there's nuggets of truth. Find that all over the place. Find that with philosophy too. There's no philosophy out there that's just unequivocally true, right? Just absolutely 100% the case. You know what I mean? So we find nuggets of truth. Like there's this part of that perspective. There's this way of arguing about it that makes sense. So point being though is that like starting off with like this validation of like, I get where you're coming from. There is actual truth of like what you're saying, so you can add stability for them, and then you can carry on that conversation, because you can't carry a conversation if you're lacking in stability.
Another thing is stability, but also kind of a presumption of equality, kind of that you're at the same level as this person. Versus if you're talking to somebody and you're correcting them, you're correcting them.
Exactly.
They're going to
like
feel as though you think you're better or smarter or more right than they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to feel condescending, often, a lot. And that's something to be careful about, is that if you say, no, that's not true, this is true, that's a really condescending thing to say. It's saying, because even if you're just like, wait, I think it's that instead, like that's kind of the best way to do it. But it can come across as saying, you are incorrect, you are wrong about this, you are wrong about this, I'm better, I know better, and I'm telling you what is right.
Like the way you said it, you were like, I wonder though if this, like, you're
Yeah.
asking questions rather than
Yeah,
saying.
asking them a question a question that opens the discussion
Yeah.
helps you feel like you are part of opening that discussion as well, if you choose to participate in that.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So-
Questions. I see.
So, like, this has to happen a lot, like, at my job, like, where doctors have to explain to clients, like, if they come in and they're like, we're not giving our dog vaccines, like, we're just not doing it, or we're putting them on a grain-free diet because of, it's more natural. And then there's been links to, like, heart problems from grain-free diets, and then so, like, if you're a vet, I don't think that you could tell the person, like, I think ask it in a way of like, I wonder if this is the truth, because like you're coming from a place of like knowing more supposedly, like that is your position. So if you're having to like counter something that someone's read or heard from people,
Yeah, taking it as like someone has an authority figure, that gets even more contentious, because
Yeah,
now
it
you're not
is.
destabilizing like their worldview on that level. There's like this like significant part of their world where they have their own worldview that in their mind is correct. So it gets even more contentious and difficult to grapple with, because now you're talking about multiple people, multiple worldviews, multiple worldviews you have to take on, and it gets even more significant in terms of here's all this evidence. And it's like, bruh. Anyways, what you were saying?
yeah, I was saying like, if you're in a position of like knowledge authority, I wonder like how that you would go about trying to convince the person of like where they're going wrong in their reasoning or what that they have read online without coming at it as a fact.
Something is that, especially in your situation where you're talking about a specific thing, I don't know enough about grain-free diets or whatever, so I'm gonna switch a little bit to, I have a cat, and cats need to eat meat. Or they need to have some specific protein in meat in their diet, or they're going to get really bad health problems. So if you're vegetarian and you put your cat on a vegetarian vegan diet, it's going to have some serious, severe health problems. So if you were talking to your vet, you're saying, I'm a vegetarian, I don't want to feed my cat meat. The vegetarian would say, because the reasons they would say, you're a person and you can choose not to eat meat. Think about lions and tigers, they have to eat meat, that's what they eat. Your cat is one of those. It's gotta eat meat. And you're gonna say, yeah, it's just not a person, and it can't make the decision to be vegetarian, and it's not making that decision to be vegetarian, therefore, yeah.
But then at that point, like, we're doing the same thing as, like, you were telling us, like, oh, we should go about it this way, where we, like, are appealing
Yeah,
to, like.
An emotional
this person
human
who-
being.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
Emotional
and I think some of the ways that, like, we go about appealing to the fact that they're another emotional human being, like, sometimes may not be appropriate for having, like, us, like, a stance as, like, a doctor.
yeah, the doctor has a different level of authority in the topic than the average person, but that only applies if that person
Is like.
believes
open
and
to
respects
respect.
in the authority of that position.
Yeah, uh-huh.
And if you don't, then,
Yeah, so I wanna go back to, you had some counter arguments, I can't remember them. Go ahead and just like, give me like one of them,
yeah,
just to see like what happens, it's like a developmental conversation, maybe it'll come back to the same thing, but really quickly.
antibiotics are different because antibiotics aren't living things or things that we're living here putting in your body. They're specifically poisons to kill things in your body. And we know what they're killing, and they're good at that, and we take them carefully. But it's not the same thing as food. It's a different thing. It has a almost antithetical purpose, the purpose of ending life versus sustaining it. And because it's not a living thing, and because the actual process of genetic modification does not often apply with antibiotics specifically, it's a different thing.
Alright, so okay, so like sidebar, this is an invalidation of my analogy. That's the attempt here, to try to invalidate, the connections that I'm trying to make. So I can have like a couple of different options here. I can either try to like, but here's why the analogy is correct, which is iffy, because they seem to be like pretty like hung up on that sort of point, like that sort of like the point that they have, and you're just trying to say like, yeah, but like it's kind of wrong, right? You can try to keep in mind like emotional sort of things, and we've tried to like make those sort of connections, the bridging, right? Maybe you can try to go back to that and, you know, try to find something of like an underlying sort of like emotional reality that you can connect to, or you just like abandon the whole ship and be like, okay, you know, you're right, I can see like why they would be different, stuff like that. I don't know, man, I kind of like trust my doctor. That right there, I am not putting it on to them, I'm not pointing them out, right? I'm pointing to myself and saying like, yeah, but like, you know, I don't know, I just like kind of trust my doctor, you know? And like, I put it like this, you know, and then this is sort of like where the more logical side of it comes in, but I prefaced it, very important, right? The whole preface thing is a recurring thing. I prefaced it though with taking it off of them, the spotlight off of them, and onto myself. I'm talking about myself now. We're just having like a casual conversation, right? So I'm gonna talk about myself now, how I feel. And again, it's like, you may very well not be able to convince that other individual. And probably honestly, most times you're probably not. Unfortunately, that's sort of the thing. Don't go into that mindset though. If you really care about the conversation and the person you're talking to, definitely like be sincere and be there. But you can also, at the very least, sometimes be talking to another individual, and other people are listening to who are on the fence. Those are the people that you want to like change their mind, right? And they're emotional beings too, and they're involved in the emotional stakes in the conversation, the emotional realities in the conversation. So you can still make these sorts of like, you know, attempts and stuff like that without the focus of mind. And honestly, it's probably like what you'd want to do anyways, just on like a moral level. To be like, I'm not like, your focus of mind isn't to go on to like, I'm gonna destroy your position, prove you wrong, in front of all these people, I'm gonna humiliate you. But instead like just making those like acknowledgements of emotional realities and your existence and their existence as an equally complex individual. And that effect, not the like part you want to have your mind onto, because it's easy to get like lost in the ideal, where your mind and focus is like, let me just like be successful, right? That's not, I mean, we're kind of doing this now, but this is like the analyzing, and we're like pulling out, we're trying to figure out like, how can we engage in the situation meaningfully, right? And we're analyzing this in like an appropriate setting. Versus like in a conversation where someone like actually has that position, right? That's real. This is hypothetical, that's real, right? So we can do that sort of thing. But regardless, so in those real conversations, having your mind on, I just want success, probably not the best sort of thing. You can have it there in your mind, right? As a part of like the sort of sentiments you feel within yourself as an emotional being. But to have the focus of pinpointing significant part of your mindset onto success, not gonna be successful. Don't do that, seriously. but engaging really and significantly, sincerely. That's the sort of thing that I would want to say about that. If anyone else wants to have any points in this, please.
I would like to learn more about this. Please bring this up more in future meetings.
Yeah, we're weekly logical fallacy.
I was thinking that often in the real world, if you're not really on the internet, this is not going to be the last time you talk to this person. And that's something to think about, that it's
Make bridges.
depending on what you're trying to do. If you really want to help this person, if you think you know better than this person and you want them to think like you think, it's a pretty, which is loaded, but it's a pretty good idea to not destroy the relationship you have with this person in one conversation. So back off.
Yeah.
Really, like mostly people should back off. I mean, I've had to do this kind of thing. I was a Boy Scout in a, and judging by my hair, you can tell I'm a pretty,
Iconoclastic.
let's say past liberal person. And it was a Catholic, like a white Catholic troop from a Catholic church. So a lot of the kids there, their parents were highly conservative, and as they got older, they started becoming very conservative. So it becomes an issue of, I have to be around these people at least once a week. How can I have conversations with these people and not lose my mind because of how they're actually talking about things?
Yeah, and make things very uncomfortable for everyone.
Absolutely, yeah. And so it's. I was in a situation where you really, like, I had to figure out how to do that, or because of the kind of person that I am, I would absolutely lose my mind. And it's a skill, and it takes a lot of practice, and it's really cool when it works.
And it is exactly a skill, and it's something that we can sharpen and develop, and all the more to engaging meaningfully in life.
And that's the reason that I'm not a huge fan of. I did debate in like middle school, like actual like forensics debate. And I don't like doing that anymore because you don't win a conversation, and a lot of people think that you can. And a lot of people are like, "Why wouldn't you debate me?" Or not to me specifically, but to other people. They're like, "Why would this person debate me?" We can have a conversation, but a debate means you want to win. You're trying to win against. When you say I want to debate someone, you're saying I want to win against that person in a conversation. And that is not something that I'm a fan of.
By the way, the word earlier actually has to do with a logical fallacy. Equivocation is when you use the ambiguity of language, and like it, so for example, like, I actually thought about this earlier, it's actually kind of funny. So like, you're in this room, right? And this detective walks in and like sees a dead body on the floor, and you have blood on your hands. You're like, what the fuck happened here? And you respond by saying like, I'm here, that there's a body on the floor, things happened, sorry. Right? It's the manipulation of like that question as like what we're actually trying to get at, and you're like, well, I'm gonna try to fuck around with this and give like a loose answer because like I'm gonna interpret this in a disingenuous, bad faith sort of way. That would be sort of like the essence of that logical fallacy. Anyway, so all right, good stuff. So let's get on to the actual topic. All right. So I wanted to open this one with "Rage Against the Dying of the Light" poem and our thoughts on it. How many people know that poem, "The Rage Against the Dying of the Light"? Okay, all right, all right. Let me look it up really quick. It's a quick poem, and we'll talk about our thoughts on it. Yeah, here it is. What the hell happened? What happened? Uno momento. Okay. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men, near death, who sees a blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on that sad height, curse bless me now, with your fierce tears I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. This is poetry. If you're feeling like, what exactly does that mean? Like, don't worry, you're not alone. Like, I was reading this and I know this poem too. It's like, there's poetry. But, you know, yeah, I mean, like, it's cool though. So, okay, so people's thoughts on that one. You want to look at it yourself too, you know, feel free to pull out your phone and be like, all right, so let me analyze that phrase, like, what?
I'm really bad at listening to poems because the rhythm of it just sends my brain off. So
Yeah.
reading is better.
Yeah,
So
fair
is
enough.
he saying like fight against? Like,
Rage, rage against the dying of the light, death.
Yeah.
Rage, rage against death itself, right?
hmm.
Though wise men know the end, their end is near, their end is right. Wait, almost again. Though wise men at their end know dark is right. So people in their old age, like, they accept death. Like, yeah, I just like, I have to accept this. It's right for my existence, right? This is, it's funny, it's almost sort of like an argument from naturalism, right? Because of this history of like death being this natural thing, it's therefore right, it's good, right? We just have to accept this, right? And the person who's writing the poem is saying, no, don't. Be fucking furious. Rage out against this dying of the light. Don't just give out and shit like that. A thought on it is knowing that this is like, first of all, poetry, very emotional stuff right there. It's a person writing this, and they're talking about these older people who have like lived these lives. They're you know, like some of them like they've like lived their lives and they've done these like amazing things. They've caught the sun, but then like they grieve at like its end. Like the sun is going down. You know, it's ending. There's like this whole grief and stuff like that. And it, you know, and different other persons there grappling with death. And they're wanting to come from this, like, you should be, like, really angry, though. And it's something like of a projection, right? It's like, there's these people who, some of them are, like, accepting it, some of them are, like, sad about it and stuff like that. And they're saying, no, be fucking angry about this, because I'm angry about this. I wish you would. I wish you would be, so you can show me, like, give something of a presence, give something, like, of an ideal that I can see, right? I want you to be angry, because I am as well. I am angry myself. You guys should be angry too. That's what we're
Yeah.
doing.
My dad died pretty young, and a while back I actually wrote a poem about him being kind of a organizer for the afterlife.
Huh.
And he would, and basically in my poem, it was his job to tell people like where they would go, you know, when they died. So I actually wrote this poem about how my dad met up with a couple of my other friends who died and told them, okay, you identified as blah, 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 so you're going to blah, blah, blah. And then, you know what, you seem like you'd be well suited for blah, 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 so you should go to blah, blah, blah too. Yeah. I believe that poem is in my latest book. I do self-published books, I'm a self-published author.
Sweet.
Thank
I
you.
think the parental connection there is interesting because the last like stanza here is, I think, literally talking about the author's father. And I think I've read this poem a couple of times, but not in a long time. I'm reading it once, and this is my connection from that. It looks like he's saying he's angry that his dad is dying, kind of, and he said, and it's maybe kind of what this poem in the story that this poem is telling. His father is dying and has accepted it, and the author is upset and really angry and afraid, and saying you should be upset. You should not be accepting that you're dying.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
it's
Because I'm dying.
because I'm not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And he's extending that to other people.
Yeah.
That wild man stanza, I wonder if that's talking about artists saying caught saying the sun in flight. It is maybe an artistic way of being able to translate something from the natural world into poetry because of the poet or music or.
Still, it sounds like a really painful way to die, and it sounds like painful emotions to go through.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and that's sort of like the point that the poet is trying to make here, right? And learn too late. They grieved it on its way, as to say that like they've caught and sang the sun in flight. They had this like great journey, and then on its way, it's ending, the sun is setting, and because of this, too late, right? Do anything really about it. Right now, they're just like reading and shit like that. If they could even do anything anyways. Last stanza there, I just want to say something, and I had this thought before. They're on that sad height, on the sad height. I think their father actually killed themselves and hung themselves. And they're saying, curse bless me now. This was actually analysis that happened in my English class, which is like making connection now. Curse bless me now. What that means is say something.
Anything.
Anything.
Curse or bless me or say something to me now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
From a whole range. Anything from this to that. Anything. Please. Something.
And then that second last line, do not go gentle on that good night. The only other stanza that has that is the very first line. So he's saying to this person's father, you should not go gentle or accept, but also make your death happen, kind of.
The part for life.
And then each stanza is examples of people who did incredible things in their lives and have knowledge of death and are still upset about it. And are still upset about it. And are
Well,
still upset about it.
suicide brings a whole new perspective to it.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
So what sort of perspective does it bring?
Like,
Hey,
yeah.
Andy, let me get your perspective on that one.
Yeah,
How does suicide function in this sort of context? How do you feel about it? What does it mean to you?
I was like, thinking about it in like the context of witnessing suicide. I mean, I haven't, like, I've heard people who've gone through that experience, and it's debilitating and demoralizing, I think, because I don't know, I'm kind of have to think about it a little bit, but there's something along the lines of, like, I think the ability for somebody to be able to control their own mortality and how we think of mortality as this sort of end-all be-all thing that, like, humans haven't really gone over it. Like, it's kind of the one thing that always follows us like a little shadow that we haven't really been able to beat. And then
Like, do you mean like on an emotional level, or like we haven't found the fountain of youth?
kind of both really, yeah.
And I think they imply each other because our time is limited. That is something that it's almost like the only thing that is limited in that way inside the human mind.
Yeah.
Because we can think about anything, but we can't think about anything forever. So we can't think about everything.
Yeah, maybe we wouldn't even want to, right? I mean, that's sort of.
And that becomes the whole thing about it. If you were to live forever, how long would you want to live?
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of fiction about that.
Yeah.
So much.
I mean, if you could like control memory and shit like that, that's like one thing. But if like that's like, if we were to just like live and stuff like that, and we don't have this technology, it's just like a hypothetical sort of thing. But if you live for like, so if you guys know Google, that number, it's 1 with 100 zeros. There's Googleplex now, which is Google to the power of Google. There is 10 to the 63 grains of sand on every single beach on this planet. Think of every single grain of sand, bro. Like that's crazy. That's just 10 to the 63. Talking about Google, that's 100, right?
100 to 100.
Yeah, and then now we have Googleplex, and then over and over and over and over and over. Like that's nuts, right? Like that sounds like the most horrific existence like there could ever be. Like you've seen everything, like as much as you're like just staring at a wall. It's like and it gets worse. Like talking about like having emotional and mental like breakdowns on like a constant level. And that shit is fucked up. But yeah, I think with suicide it's interesting, and there's a lot of it's kind of like I'm getting into this a little bit. Suicide is an interesting sort of topic for me, I think in particular. So I've come across people in my life who have said to me that like suicide is like a really selfish thing to do. And it's funny, and there's like other philosophers who have said about this this sort of thing too. I think like Sioran said something about this, about like suicide being like the one thing that a person really has to themselves, the right over, is their own existence. It's like the one fucking thing we really got to ourselves is ours, absolutely to ours, and we have complete control over that, like our lives, existence. If I want to take myself out, I fucking can. It's the one thing I can do, the one thing I can really control, sort of thing. It's mine, absolutely. So it's interesting to think about, it's like, you know, but we still do have these connections, so, I don't know. Is it really selfish, or is like, do we really have that right? I don't know, how do people feel about that?
I think it, depends on, I hate to say depends on your definition, but selfishness is not, I wouldn't say it's a good or bad thing, it's everything. Anything a human does is self-centered. Even if they're helping people because they choose to. Or even if they're forced to do something, like they have a job and they must work for money, they are choosing to do that work for money, or say they were enslaved and are forced to work or die. They are choosing to work rather than die. And often they don't get to choose not to die, but that's not a choice they're making. Any choice you make is a choice that is self-centered in some way, not necessarily for your own specific benefit, but maybe for your kind of mental benefit, or for the ease of your mind, kind of, if that makes sense. All that to say, I think suicide is a selfish thing, but I think it's not. I don't think it's bad because it's selfish.
Interesting. Okay, fair enough. Which is sort of like a funny thing about the word, because when you say like selfish, it's like, that is bad.
Yeah, it's connotatively bad.
Yeah, but so you wanna like make an alteration about that, to like
Yeah.
try to pull out that connotation that we don't need, we wanna be accurate here. That's what I think, lack of a better word.
Yeah, I would say when people say that suicide is selfish, what they're saying is that it hurts the people around you when you do it, and that it doesn't hurt you anymore because you no longer feel it.
And that's a really significant part about when we look at like people who take out their own lives, is they don't really wanna kill themselves, they just
want
want
it
to
to stop. They just want it to
want
stop.
it to stop, yeah. Angel, did you wanna say something?
I was,
I have a question notes there.
I just like, I like write things, I'm like, oh, I wanna like remember that, and then writing it helps me remember it. Were you in class on, what was it, Thursday?
Probably not, I haven't been going to class lately.
He was talking about,
Canoe, right?
yes,
Huh.
he started Camus because he wasn't there on Tuesday, but, he canceled class on Tuesday, but,
Yeah, that's right, I was like, yes.
yeah, he was talking about that I guess Camus' stance on it would be that committing suicide in most cases would be something that he called like philosophical suicide, where you're like
Yeah.
running away from confronting the
Yeah.
problem.
Uh-huh.
And then in only like certain scenarios where like you're being tortured and you're not gonna be able to leave, and like your existence is like truly suffering, then in those cases that it would be permissible.
But it's funny though,
You
because
know-
like, we talk about like what is suffering, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's sort of like a little bit of wiggle room there.
You know, I think I'm probably the only person in this room that really sees suicide or suicidal ideations as a symptom of an illness. I see it as a purely medical thing. I see suicide as like, if a person wants to commit suicide, that's like having a cough, that's like having nausea. It means you have an underlying, condition that needs to be treated. So I see it from a really medical point of view. And there are some exceptions to that, but that's really, really, really rare.
I would say I agree. I agree and disagree. I don't think that every person who commits suicide or considers suicide necessarily. I don't believe that suicidalism is almost in every case a symptom of specific mental internal condition or physical.
Well, depression.
Yeah, but, I mean, we just mentioned a circumstance where, if the external condition of your life makes you suicidal, and I would not say necessarily that it causes depression necessarily, I would say that it's situational. And,
Happens.
yeah,
Like,
as somebody who was treated for depression, and for suicidal ideas, that was a medical thing, and I got better as my brain developed, and as I yeah, it got better.
Like, I guess I have a segue off of that, like, how we talk about if someone wants to be, like, at the end of their life, where they know they have terminal cancer, and they're not, let's like say the example, so they're not suffering from depression, but they know they're going to die, they know they're going to have not a smooth death, and they want to have, what is the term, like, something euthanasia?
Yeah, well, sure, I mean, like
Assisted suicide, euthanasia is for cats.
I mean,
But yes, assisted suicide is for people, yeah.
Yeah, assisted suicide,
There's-
we're like,
The
we're
connotation.
checking-
The connotation of euthanasia is,
Yeah,
ugh,
yeah.
World War II.
The world's been, the word's been painted. since-
Okay, you're injecting drugs and then there is a death that occurs. I like associate those things in my head.
They were you technically mean the same thing. Like we say that because it's a euphemism. It's literally like assisted death. It functions. It is a euphemism. Like, but that's not like necessarily like actually what it is. Language though. Anyways, you're saying.
Assisted suicide. Like in those cases, like we could say that there is perhaps in some cases there's not like an existential suffering going on, like things that would come out of someone that is depressed, but they still want to end their life due to physical suffering. And so in that case, like I think that suicide gets evaluated a little bit differently than it would for someone who is like of young age and has a long life ahead of them and like could be treated for something that is a mental illness to prevent that.
I'm kind of getting the idea that we're kind of not necessarily specifically agreeing with it, but understanding the idea of necessarily suicide is justified, and I'm putting that in big quotes. If, or let's say it's not justified, if at some point the circumstances that are making you consider it will change. So for example, if you have a mental illness that's making you consider suicide, being treated for that is a circumstance that will change. Just getting out of middle school is a circumstance that will change. Having some kind of terminal debilitating illness, especially in the situation where it's absolutely terminal, is not necessarily a situation that would change.
Yeah.
And people make the argument that that is when suicide is justified. And I feel like suicide, because of physical terminal pain and illness, I feel like it's a different thing.
Yeah. I wonder if people would still like consider it selfish at that point.
Yeah.
Like it's still considered suicide.
I wonder if the idea of suicide in one word and in one connotation is not a word that's broad enough for the human condition.
Yeah.
I wonder if the idea of assisted suicide and suicide are.
Because even the term assisted suicide is vague. Like we understand it as being like someone's at the end, like has a terminal illness or towards the end of their life, and they ask their doctor to like kindly put them to sleep.
Yeah, I mean it's closer to hospice.
Yeah.
But
it still gets like tagged with like.
I think of the movie $1 Million Baby, because in the end, and this is a huge spoiler if any of you ever want to see the movie. In the end, the hero of the story commits suicide. So, and she basically asks, she's a boxer and she sustains a really, really, really severe injury that basically keeps her from ever really doing anything again except for just living in a bed. And she basically becomes a quadriplegic. And she asks her trainer to basically disable her breathing machine so that she, dies. And the trainer has to think about it for quite a while, but he eventually agrees to do it. And then in the end of the movie, he disappears because he just can't, live with.
You also didn't want to get charged with murder.
What?
Right? You don't want to be charged with murder.
Yeah,
That
that's
can
true,
happen
that's
like
true,
that, yeah.
that's true.
Hey, Autumn, I wanna get your perspective on this, okay? So this is Epicurus, ancient Greek philosopher, okay? So, this is him on death. We're gonna talk about these sort of perspectives and the rationality of our fear, if it is rational, our fear of death, right? So here's the quote, all right, you listening? You ready? All right, cool. Why should I fear death? Question mark. If I am, death is not. If death is, I am not. Why should I fear that which can only exist when I do not? Your thoughts, Autumn?
Well, it's a good point, because it is like, you know, when you're dead, you can't understand anything, so why fear it? Makes sense. I guess it's because, like, I don't know how to say this, but like in, Judaism, there's like an idea, I'm not Jewish, but there's an idea that like they don't like believe in, as I understand, they don't like believe in an afterlife so
That's my
much,
understanding too.
because, the idea that like there may be an afterlife, but we don't know. Like we know we have like life on Earth right now, so like let's make the best of it with what we have. So I guess that would be my thought.
Yeah.
So I just wanna like, okay, so you pulled in like Judaism as like a connection in your mind of like, there's this like non-existence, right? Do you feel like, okay, let me ask you this, let me rephrase it. Do you feel that like Epicurus is justified in their analysis on like we can talk about like the logic, like do we really just not exist when we die? Like there's that part to it. But like on an emotional level, right? Do you think that like Epicurus in the words, the connotations, like what they're putting out there, right? Do you think there's like justification for that to say like, listen, guys, ridiculous shit to be like afraid to die. Come on, we're not even there for it. What the fuck are you complaining for? Sort of thing. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that sort of like approach about death? It's just straightforward, like, I'm not.
I mean, like emotionally, I agree that like the reason that I said that was just kind of playing devil's advocate. Like I like initially, like I instinctively kind of like it and agree with it. I guess it's just kind of like, what was your question?
I'm saying that like, so looking at like, okay, let me
Yeah.
pull it up again. So effectively, I have to exit out of this. Effectively is that when I am, death is not, and when death is, I am not. So that sort of like phrasing of it, right, as like, this is the situation, right? On like an emotional level, it's pushing for like this emotional distance that we should have with death. Like, not even necessarily like, oh, just like get over your fear and stuff like that, but also just like, don't care. You know what I mean? So just like, I want to say more like juicy than just like, well, what are your thoughts? Which is like a valid question because I do want to know your thoughts, but I want to give you more substance so they can like grab onto it, buy into it.
You should be a teacher.
I'm trying to one day actually. Thank you for the compliment. So with that sort of like analysis, right? This sort of like phrasing about like the situation of death and this approach of like just, you know, like sort of something of an implication on an emotional level. Like just don't care, right? Just give into apathy in concerns to your death. Do you think that's effective as like an approach for like the human condition that we should just like not care? Or do you think maybe it's like a problem? Maybe we should care about death? And in what ways? If yes, your thoughts?
I mean, it could be freeing to not care about death and say like, you know, live like you're gonna die tomorrow, like live like, you know, well it doesn't matter, like I can do whatever I want because, you know, life but I should have written down your questions, but as soon as I start talking, I can't remember anything.
Don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it. Yeah. So just like to rephrase that into like a nutshell. So do you think that it's like meaningful, understanding that we are the human experience, right? Do you think it's meaningful that their approach, right, of this phrasing of like just don't even care about it, like just don't even care, this emotional distancing, right? Do you think that's meaningful for us, or at least I suppose like at least it's beside that sort of train of thought, do you think that there is meaning to having emotional attachment to death, right? And if so, in what ways?
Well, I guess it's like, you know, people say the shortest, you know, people say life is short, but it's the longest thing anyone's ever gonna do. Like, you know, is it meaningful to have a distance and death. Can't remember what organized, well, you can go and I'll think.
Alright,
I was thinking about when we're talking about death versus this specific quote. I think that it's a different thing between my death and me thinking about my death and me thinking about your death.
Yeah.
And that when I die, I believe that I will stop. Or I don't know what will happen. My probably best guess is that nothing. Absolutely nothing. The way if you've ever fallen asleep one night really, really quickly and you don't have any experience of sleeping or dreaming or anything, and you close your eyes and you open them and you're there.
Yeah.
That time that elapsed, or if you've ever been under for a surgery or something and having the idea of lapsed time, that's everything and there's no after that.
So in that sort of sense then, death is one instant that is infinitely small and you just never wake up, right?
It
Because when you
is
close
an
your eyes
instant.
and wake back up, it's like
It-
that, right?
it-
But there's never
yeah.
the waking up, there's never the end to the one infinitely small instant. In terms of like experience, right? The
I said
rate-
that you can experience an instant, this is no experience, there is nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that a fear of death is rational because humans past their biological predispositions exist to experience. That's my personal belief that we exist, or specifically I exist to experience the universe, to see the universe. I'm the universe looking at itself. Because humans, as far as we know, are the only eyes that can say, there's the universe.
I mean, it
But that's kind of besides the point. I would say that my point is that the idea that our time to experience is finite is one that is scary. And I believe that if we're defining whether a fear is rational or not, I think we need a better definition of that. If you have some kind of idea of if a fear is rational, what does that mean?
Sure.
No, I'm asking.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, legitimate question. It's kind of usually posed as like, at least the sort of attempt here is, do you think it's rational, right? In other words, does it make sense? Is it like the fear of death is something that's like not just valid because it exists, but as well as justified? Is there any sort of like justification in terms of like the human experience, right? But not like necessarily limited to that. So when I say that, what I mean is that like the human experience, we have this like generally innate fear of like death and stuff like that. So there's justification there in terms of like it exists as a like a valid emotion, but also on like in terms of like what actually is happening, right? It's like there's this thing, it is a fear, part of the human experience. So if we're basing like rationality as far as like, well, how does it apply to the human experience? And it's like, well, it's there and it's something we don't want. And it's like, oh, we don't want death. Like, oh, okay, therefore like the fear is like justified and stuff like that. But I don't want to like rope it into just that. I don't want to box it in because I think we can stretch our minds to like outside of that and wonder about like what can be in terms of like the potential of how we understand death
Well,
and how
like
it
my
interacts
fear
in this in our
of
lives.
death,
What?
like the reason I fear death is because there are certain things that I want to accomplish in this life.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to die like in this moment, I wouldn't have accomplished them. So really, my fear of death is really fear of not of having gone through a life without accomplishing
Sure.
things.
So I wonder about that though, because it's like, if you were to die this instant, I mean, it's one thing to be like, oh my God, there's a car coming at me, like that's
Yeah.
one thing. But it's another thing to be just like an instant, right? Because as soon as that instant takes place, all those things about all those attachments, like, oh, I have these ideals, these dreams, they effectively, as that instant now reality going on, right? This is reality, no longer, never did exist, never was there, right? So this is sort of the point in question about like analyzing the rationality of our fear. Because it makes sense to say that like, oh, that like fear is justified when it's like, but it doesn't exist. Once we're actually talking about death happening, it doesn't exist at all. You're gone.
The fear doesn't exist once you die?
Everything doesn't exist because you don't.
Yeah.
That's sort of the presumption.
The idea of the suffering that fear is trying to prevent your human body from experiencing is not extant because it doesn't because you can't experience it anymore. You can't experience the thing that's actually scary. If you're scared of sharks, you can get near a shark and that's scary. A shark can bite your leg off and that's scary.
But when we phrase it like that, we're like, we shouldn't be afraid of death, because when death happens, we will no longer have that fear. To me, it is like similar to saying like, oh, we should be happy right now, because when we die, like, we won't remember happiness, we won't remember feeling happiness.
We won't remember anything because we won't think.
Yeah, we won't.
Here's the difference though, problem with that. Great perspective there, love the contribution, very much appreciated, thank you, Angela. But when we're talking about like happiness, about like our life like mattering, we're talking about life happening and happiness happening with it, right? This is happening for us, we're experiencing it. Once we start talking about death in this sort of context, we're gonna go ahead and presume it's non-existence. I make an analogy myself. Death, as it is experiential, as it exists for ourselves, as relevant to our reality, is absolutely analogous to pre-birth. You weren't there, right? So it's funny as well about this, is that if we're gonna say that like, oh, but like there's something of a basis to be like, oh, I'm kind of afraid of death. Why aren't you like grieving about the fact that you weren't there for the infinity before, but you're gonna grieve for the infinity afterwards? Why bother?
I have something that connects to that and connects to what you said earlier about the things you want to do in your life and being afraid to not be able to do all of them. You have because of how the human experience and culture works, we have a pretty general pace at which our life goes. We spend about the first maybe up to 20, 25, 30 years of our life in school. We work for 40 years, we retire, and then we die. And overall, at the close to the limit is about 100 years. We have 100 years. Some people have close to or a little over 100 years to do the things that we have been conditioned to want to do, and the things that biologically we want to do, which is make more humans, and eat and sleep, and imagine that if I told you right now, you are not going to die. That is not going to happen for you. That is not going to happen. You are not going to die. How fast would you run towards the things that you wanted to do so dramatically in the next 100 years?
I've heard that argument.
Yeah.
How fast would you?
Why would you be bothered? We could always do it tomorrow.
Why would you put so much effort towards doing the things that you want to do as fast as you need to do them? 20 years feels like a really long time, but imagine you had 20,000 years to do something. Imagine you had 20,000 years to get married. Imagine you could meet, in that time you could meet every person on the planet several times over, meet their grandchildren, meet their great-grandchildren, their great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. A mind-bogglingly huge amount of people, and you only have to choose one of them to marry. So why would you choose one right now? And of course that's talking about love as a rational thing, and it isn't. That's not a great example. But say, for example, you don't have the stress of having to feed yourself or you starve. What job would you pick? What would you pick a job if you had any options that you had to pay for rent or food or something like that? Those pressures that are there to keep you from dying.
I still
you have
job.
to.
Would you go like hitchhiking around the world?
Yeah,
sort of thing,
but what job would you pick?
Chaplain.
Say again?
Chaplain.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a cool thing, but would you do it right out of college, or would you take a couple of years and do what you want? Would you take 20 years and
I would take it
travel
right out of college.
and learn more things out of school, and then come back to, and that's an option, but
I think that if I can, I don't mean to interrupt, but
yeah, I'm talking way too much.
It's okay, that's a good point.
To make something like a building on that, I think in general, the human beings were like really fucking lazy. Right?
Yeah.
We're lazy bastards.
Yeah.
But there is a lot to say as well that experience and like accomplishment, it's like its own end. It is the motivating force. So the time constraints and all that jazz, like having that like taken away from us, maybe it could just help us like not be so anxious about stuff. Like I have to get stuff done now.
It'd be really nice. I think honestly that being able to choose how long you live would be a good thing for people. And that is not a radical,
Actually,
like, I think overall,
because if a person's just like, if like they experience like so I'll put it like this. If people were really able to choose like how long they could live and shit like that, and a person like does like everything that they want to do, but they don't want to die because death is still scary, right? Then they're just existing to simply just avoid death. At that point, it's like, is that really healthy? You're literally running from something the entire time of your existence. I don't know if that's exactly healthy. At least necessarily that it would be healthy. It's very well possible to not be healthy. And I think we can say a lot for
Wise point.
that's really interesting. Which is why I think death is something that I don't know if fear is the right thing. It's a constraint. In my English writing class, where we're learning about constraints on what is kind of supposed to be written. Like besides like your authorial intent and besides what the audience is expecting, what other things in the world, for example, after 9/11, writing articles about airplanes or terrorists was different. It was different because of the context. It was different because of literally the constraints on what feels right to write. And connecting that to this, like birth is your starting point. You don't think about that because it doesn't affect you. The fact that you started doesn't affect you as much as like when you started or where you are, but where you are in relation to what's coming does affect you. Because if you're writing something down on a piece of paper or making a poster or something, you're really concerned about, you have to start here and you have to stop here. So how big are you going to make your letters? How are you going to manage your time and space across the page?
Sure.
And
we do this for life. Yeah.
yeah.
Autumn, I want to ask you this. So hopefully you have some time to get your gogs going there. So just to rephrase the question, right? So about the validity from Epicurus, right? About the validity of emotional detachment from the reality of death, right? That's sort of how Epicurus is going about the situation of death, right? It's just saying like it's when I am, death is not. When death is not. When death is, I am not, right? There's a clear and holistic separation of realities here. They do not overlap, right? We talk about like the cause of the death, but that's not death, right? They're two different things. So as it goes, right? There's the fronting, shush, autumn. I want you to get involved in this. I've heard from enough from you. So I hear from you. So there's this fronting about it that we need to be emotionally detached, right? We just need to understand that it's not a reality in this reality, right? Because this is our lives. Right? This is our lives. We're talking about our lives here. This is our reality. It's not there. It's not there at all. So, hence the emotional detachment. However, if it is not valid to have such an approach on death, where would be the places in our lives that you could see that, like, we actually like should care about death? You know what I mean? Like, if someone like dies and stuff like that, like, would that be an example of a place that we should like really care about death and like mourn? You know what I mean? If we could like, there's something to say about like emotions innately within us, like we feel sad when someone's gone. But there's another thing to say, like, if we were to like look at these two different avenues of like, we'd either just be completely apathetic, or like, oh, they're gone, okay, cool, they just like exited the game, or like I'm gonna actually like consider this and feel it. You know what I mean? Where do you think that could go? What's the potential, the meaningful potential there that you could see possibly?
Hey, I have a question for you when you're done with that avenue of thought.
Okay.
Well, my notes were not very relevant to that. I guess, well, thinking about like the quote, like, if death is, I am not, like, like the other side of the coin, like it's like directly opposite. And like, I mean, I'll just say like, I have depression, I think about like death and suicide all the time, and I was thinking about like, the reason that I'm not doing it is because I'm afraid. Like instinctually, I'm just afraid that I, like, whatever, like, we have life, and like, it is good or it is bad or whatever, but like, we don't, like, it is it's like a fourth dimension, like it's something you just can't imagine because it's like just a different dimension you're going to, like the, I think someone mentioned it, like the Flatlands book, like, going from like a point to the, well, anyway, dimensions is something for math, yeah, I don't know, I think, I have ideas of what happens after death, but I really don't know, I feel like it could be worse, so that's why I'm not doing it, I don't know,
Okay, fair enough.
that's all I got.
No, good,
So
good perspective there.
Here's my question.
If I can just give feedback really quickly.
Yeah.
So good stuff there. I like the perspectives. I like the analogy there. The example given that it's like death is this fourth dimensional, other dimensional reality. That's not here, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So because of that inherent like disconnect, then you can say like something about like I'm trying to think about like what you were saying. So point being though is that there is like validity to Epicurus's like standpoint and like approach to death, right? That there's like that's such a serious like disconnect. It's like we like don't have to care about it. And then you were also talking about like how because it like your life could be worse, that it's like you can leave death alone sort of thing, right? And that's like a really good function of this emotional detachment from death, at least as an example, like where you just don't care about it, right? Because you're focused on life, and it's okay, I can bear this stuff, and I can get through it, and I have like some good stuff to look forward to, and there's gonna be a better tomorrow, I can improve myself, I can improve my life, there's skills I have to develop, experience that I wanna have, all that really great, beautiful, meaningful stuff. Cool, awesome. All right, thank you, Anna.
Thank you for articulating my thought.
You articulated it first, right? I'm a copycat, sorry.
Okay, question. So, according to my autism therapist, and according to my good friend who is on the autism spectrum, and according to myself who is also on the autism spectrum, it is very common for people with autism not to grieve relatives or friends who have passed, quite as hard as neurotypical people do. Knowing what you know about autism and knowing what you know about philosophy, why do you think that is?
That's an autism thing?
That's an autism thing.
Yeah.
Okay, how about that? Yeah, I relate to that.
Even if the person died young, even if the death was tragic, we just tend not to
It's
have
not-
such an emotional reaction.
If I could build
It's
on that.
very strange.
it's weird, it's weird.
I would say that it's not, because it's ambiguous a little bit, the focus of mind there is not that like, oh, you're like a bit of a sociopath, right? It's
Yeah.
more so about like the expression of it, like, you still feel like sad, like,
Yeah.
look at, like, autistic people are feeling too,
Yeah,
Like,
definitely, and I would say that too as an autistic person.
yeah, but it's
We
the
don't really
expression
understand
of emotions that autism, kind of really wreaks havoc and stuff like that,
Yeah.
communicating emotions, stuff like that, it wreaks havoc there. But yeah, so interesting about like philosophy and autism and something of an intersection there. So maybe put another sort of question there if you want to have something like that. So do we feel like there's sense about like the autistic approach, right, in terms of like at least like the expression of it, right, like getting really into like crying and maybe something of like rumination, and that's another like kind of like really significant part about like the conversations, like when we start talking like considering like death, people have died and stuff like that, that you can go into like mourning and you can express yourself on like that fundamental human emotional level, but it's really hard to not start ruminating, and all of a sudden it's like I'm kind of like what I'm doing with engaging this, like kind of giving into like my emotions, actually it's not the most healthy sort of thing, right? And you think as well back to like, well, this person who's gone, who like I cared for, they cared for me, like what would they want from me? You know what I mean? Like I've heard that like from so many different places I know, that like if I were to die, I don't want you to mourn for me. Like it's okay, like move on, live your life. Like I'm out. Like don't worry about me anymore. So it's an interesting sort of like consideration. Like, is there good sense about that sort of reality there, the autistic reality, where they don't so delve into like the extent that we sort of do, right? Are they better off than us, right? How do people feel about that one?
Yeah, as somebody, I'm not diagnosed with autism, but like, I'm pretty sure I'm at least a little bit autistic.
Okay, you do strike me like that, yeah.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. And I was thinking that, for example, my main kind of experience with this is my grandma died last summer, before I went to school. And it was weird because I haven't cried about it once, and I'm a pretty big crier with like TV shows and stuff. But I don't know. It's a weird thing that it's kind of connected to other ways I experience the world. It's an out of sight, out of mind thing. Is a really fairly callous way to say it, I would say. But it's that I don't know. It's that it is no longer there. When I was in middle school, high school, got in trouble, got my phone taken away. Like it was bad for a little while, and then it was okay because I didn't have it. It's like I didn't have it; it was gone. It was just the fact of the situation. My brain adjusted to fairly quickly that something isn't there, and something isn't there is not as bad as something is there. And that's I don't know. I'm not good.
I mean, I would say that like it can be difficult when we have something that's like so ingrained to our lives. I think it's like pretty relatable for a lot of people. You get used to it, right? And so now there's the absence of thing, and there's like this huge disruption. You know, bit of a connection back to like earlier conversations about like talking to people who are using logical fallacies. When there's like major disruptions to like our worldview, our stability in our lives, typically not a good thing, like on an emotional level, right? So it's at least interesting to sort of consider that like you can have that as a reality, sort of like a paradox, really, actually. Like you can have that reality where like there's something like a part of your life and then it's not, and it can either cause like this disruption and like this destabilization for your world, right? Or it's just something that you like grapple with and like move on with and accept, really accept that this is the new reality and I'm okay with this. So it's an interesting sort of thing to consider that sort of reality, particularly in light of like death, right? Because we have people, we have these connections, we have friends, and it's like they're a part of our lives, and so we feel bad. Certainly, like that's definitely like a reality there. But it's interesting to just, I don't know, just like in a general sense, I suppose, to just like consider that there's this like this scheme of like this range where it can like be just really disrupting, and then really quickly to accept it because it's like they're now gone for our lives. And it's like also both at the same time, right? You grieve at first, you're crying at first. Typically, they're a sociopath. But then there's that reality too that comes in, and it makes that sort of like connection with our nature to just accept things that are no longer there, no longer the case, sort of thing. I don't know. Does that make us like fucked up in the head? That we like we like accept that sort of thing, right? And it's like, now this person's just not in my life. I'm just gonna kind of like forget about them. Maybe like you remember them every once in a while, like, oh, it's their birthday, and then you like reflect on them and your connections with them and how beautiful a person they were and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's an interesting sort of like line to draw. Are we all a bit of a sociopath? That we move on? Is there something with sociopathy there? How do you feel about that?
I would say that the fact that there is necessity for moving on at any level probably means that there was some connection before. So I would say that in the context of a person who does not make connections with other people in that way would not have to move on from that, and therefore, because we move on as little as that may be, probably not sociopathy. I mean, I consider that a sociopath, and I'm probably not.
I know that when a friend of mine died, I felt the need to include her in my creative work for a little while.
Yeah, and those are really meaningful connections that we make for how we remember a person, in those sorts of ways. If what other sort of experiences do people have like with remembering like their lost loved ones?
Day of the Dead.
What?
Just like New Orleans funerals and stuff, they're very celebratory for life. Funerals in general. Remembrance of the life after it comes, and that's something that's super interesting about the way that most cultures, like culturally and how do I say like as a community, engage with death is continuing that life through our personal experience, through everyone else's experience. And I think that's an interesting thing of how it's antithetical to the idea of people stop. when they die, they stop. And that person is no longer a person, no longer anything, and they no longer experience. And our ability to take their experiences and internalize them and keep them going becomes a more poetic way, making them part of ourselves and then living through us. In a very, very abstract way, not in a literal sort of religious way, but the idea that if a human is their experiences, which I don't know if they are, because a lot of others have their experiences, I'm not sure what my point is.
That happens in philosophical conversations all the time, don't worry about it. Here's a new question. Why do murderers murder? Ooh. Like this
I
song,
think that
like this
varies
song
from
has to
murderer
be
to
what's up?
murderer.
I think it's often sometimes a control thing. Often it's almost always about some kind of power to not have any witnesses to a different crime. The power to control someone fully for whatever reason that you feel like you have lost control, whether someone is a jealous spouse, something like that, you cannot control this person's cheating behavior, so you control their behavior by stopping all of their behavior.
I had a therapist tell me that like she counseled like about seven people that had killed someone, and she said when she like heard their stories and heard why they killed that person, she said that she thought to herself, I wonder why you didn't kill them sooner.
Yeah.
So I think there are like circumstances in which murder occurs, in which like there's some stuff going on.
It's-
That's interesting. That's actually great. Yeah, just about that.
And I think in situations like that, it's almost always about control. About being able to control your own life in that way, someone else is controlling your life in some way mentally that is so dramatic and overpowering that you must get them out of your life in the one way that you can. Whether that's in an instant or over a 4-year marriage. I'm going to that one quite a bit, but like that's the idea of there are some things that you can't get away from. There's some people you can't get away from, so you have to get them away from you. In the most literal, most final, most fundamental way.
Yeah. And then, so that's interesting, you know, some of the conversation about like, if you have like this abuser or like this manipulator in your life, right? Would we say like if you kill them, would we count that? Would we count that as self-defense? Yeah.
I believe it depends on the severity.
Huh?
It depends on the severity, and it depends on the personal level of severity too. Not any kind of general idea of how severe it is, but to a person how severely it is affecting them. And I think that varies dramatically from people to people. I think that whether it's justified or not is kind of not a conversation that is happening, or that I kind of want to get into. Whether it's justified to kill someone in any specific situation, because that depends on any situation. That's why we have courts. Was it justified to end this person's life?
Sure.